that becomes the only path we know of to force this administration to get more serious about a ceasefire. We believe if this administration wants a ceasefire, they got the power to get it done.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
You know, we spoke to you about 6 months ago now, in part about the positioning of the American labor movement on what's happening in Israel. And we spoke not long after the formation of the National Labor Network for Ceasefire, and it was also not long after the AFL-CIO Executive Board unanimously endorsed a ceasefire. I imagine, you know, I understand that those conversations were pretty tricky and some tense conversations, I think. Since then, we know that the destruction has continued in Gaza, and the Labor Network for Ceasefire has sought to increase pressure on the U.S. administration to leverage power against Israel to try to put an end to the war. And so before we talk about some of the specific recent developments in Israel, can you talk to us generally about why you think it was important to stand up an organization specifically within the labor movement specifically devoted to pushing for a ceasefire in Gaza? Why was it important to create the National Labor Network for Ceasefire?
Well, that's a very good question. And look, the question of war and peace is a working class issue. Here we are, workers paying taxes. The billionaire class generally doesn't. The Jeff Bezos of the world don't. The huge corporations generally don't, but workers do. And how our taxes are used should be very important and is very important to the workers. So here we have a situation. Look, it's a historically complex situation. The National Labor Network isn't going to resolve the entire crises and challenges of the Middle East. But we can fight to resolve, because unions always should be on the side of social justice, not just justice in our workplace, but we live in communities, we live in a country, and we live in the world. And our members are really horrified at what's going on. And it's particularly important for the U.S. labor movement to weigh in, because our government and this administration is feeding this war. Mm-hmm. And any objective observer, I think, draws the honest conclusion. That's what Israel's response to the Hamas October 7th actions, which every union and the National Labor Network has condemned. But Israel's response has been barbaric and horrific, targeting men, women, innocent men, women, and children, particularly children, targeting food, targeting water supplies, targeting the healthcare system, targeting housing. 85% of the housing is destroyed. Targeting journalists, over 140 journalists, so the word can't get out, have been targeted. We can't sit here, if we believe in any kind of justice, and let that happen. In addition, this has a real danger of leading to a wider war, and it looks like if things go the wrong way, and they are going the wrong way, that this could easily become a regional war or maybe a world war. Who's asked to fight these wars? Who's asked to kill and be killed if it's not the workers of the world? So simply speaking, the labor movement needs to speak out, because we, at least as a minimum, need to answer the cries of humanity. Stop the killing, stop the bombing, stop the targeting of food and water and medical hospitals and so on. So our demands are quite simple, right? Release of all hostages on all sides, an immediate ceasefire, long overdue. When our union first made a statement on November 8th, I think in the statement it said 10,000 civilians have been killed. Now it's closer to 50,000, and that may be a low figure. Immediate ceasefire and massive humanitarian aid. And since those original demands, and by the way, there's 8 national unions that make up the National Labor Network, but there's over 200 other union organizations and thousands of individuals that have signed on. And even those unions who are not officially part of the National Labor Network, generally speaking, now have some level of resolution or statements calling for a ceasefire. That's the minimum we can do. If we stand for solidarity, and the labor movement does and should, then that solidarity needs to extend to the innocent people of Gaza, an open door prison with people with no place to go, being starved out. And of course, the workers of Gaza and the trade unions of Gaza and Palestine as well. So we're proud to be part of this. And by the way, our members overwhelmingly support this position. It came up at our recent national convention in July, and the convention overwhelmingly stood by and reiterated the leadership position of calling for a ceasefire. And we also had a separate resolution that was debated out that passed, calling for an end to military aid at least until there's a ceasefire. When I say an end to military aid, I'm talking about U.S. military aid. Every one of these bombs, I shouldn't say everyone, but most of these bombs have the USA printed on them. Mm-hmm. And workers should not stand for that. We need our tax dollars to go for justice anywhere, and certainly justice at home. And we want those tax dollars used for education, for healthcare, for a clean environment, and so on. So it is a working class issue, and we're on the side of the people of this country, overwhelmingly, and the people of the world. Let's have a ceasefire. Let's stop the humanitarian crisis. Let's get food, water, and supplies into Gaza. And then from there, hopefully we'll be able to play a role in trying to figure out the best path forward. But let's at least stop the slaughter.
Yes, and it is very frustrating, when you see even supposed advocates and allies of the labor movement kind of chastise us for taking a position on war and peace, which, as you rightly pointed out, it's really difficult to imagine a more working class issue than war, than whether working people are going to be killed by other conscripted working people. It's just like, how can you get more working class issue than that? And yet, people like Orrin Cass, who kind of purport to be pro-union and pro-labor, tell us to shut up and dribble, that kind of thing. And it's just very frustrating to see that. And I hope that others kind of see through the charade of these types who pretend on the one hand to support us, and then on the other hand, anytime we kind of step out of line, they try to, whip us back into line. And you mentioned that, the APWU called for, cease to military aid for Israel, at least until a ceasefire. And that call was echoed by the National Labor Network for Ceasefire a couple of months ago. And so can you explain why was that an important step for your union and the labor network to take, because I imagine that there are some people who say, look, you've called for a ceasefire, the administration knows your position, why do you keep bringing this kind of stuff up? Why do you want to add pressure to, they already know how you feel? Why was it important to take this next step?
Well, obviously, whatever limited pressure we brought to bear and others hasn't been enough. And we believe, and we're not alone, that the United States government and this administration has absolute leverage through the purse and through armaments to stop this slaughter. And so that letter was an attack. It's really in line with our initial demand for a ceasefire. Here we are 11 months later. Now what we've said is that to get a ceasefire, obviously, since nothing else has worked, obviously, the leverage and the pressure has to be increased. And that PowerPoint is the question of the military funding. Israel gets over $4 billion a year, the state of Israel, over $4 billion a year in normal times, so-called normal times, from our tax dollars. And that's basically military aid. And as soon as October 7th took place, the Biden administration upped, I think, another 14 or 15, 16 billion immediately. And that's being used to slaughter innocent children. And so that ceasefire, people can talk about ceasefire all day long. The politicians can talk about ceasefire all day long. They have the power with the purse strings to force that ceasefire. And so that letter was a recognition that the pressure thus far and the calls for a ceasefire have not been enough. And we have to up that demand. And it's absolutely within the power of this administration and this government to withhold the military funding and other pressure points that they could certainly use. And so that becomes the only path we know of, or one of the main paths, to force this administration to get more serious about a ceasefire. We believe if this administration in the White House and in this Congress wants a ceasefire, they got the power to get it done. And they need to go out and get it done.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
The American labor movement is not the only party trying to increase pressure for a ceasefire. The Israeli labor movement is, and this was very shocking to me, actually. But tensions seem to be increasing in Israeli society, and the Israeli Labor Federation, the Histadrut, I think that's how you pronounce it, they called for a general strike last Monday. They conducted a general strike last Monday. It was short-lived. The courts put an end to it on the same day. But the willingness of hundreds of thousands in Israel to strike over the posture of the government seems to show that patience is running thin with the government's position. Even still, the reason for the discontent among the Israeli population is kind of is kind of complicated, or maybe you would say it's not complicated because it's really not, wrapped up in the suffering of the Palestinians. It's primarily wrapped up in right concern about the Israeli hostages and trying to get them home. But it seems like there's a recognition or a bubbling recognition that the interest that the Israeli public has with bringing the hostages home is at odds with the government's position of continuing to prosecute the war in Gaza, or whatever you want to call it. Can you expand on some of those dynamics and what the strike means?
Well, Jacob, I can try. I think you summed it up pretty well. Some of the motivations might be a little different than others, but the fact of the matter is, with hundreds of thousands of unionized workers who probably have recognized for a long time that Netanyahu was no friend of the workers of Israel, and certainly not friend of the workers of the Palestinian communities, that he's also an enemy of the safety of the hostages, because part of any ceasefire deal includes release of hostages. And it's come out in the press just the other day or two, in the Israeli press. They actually have a document where some of those hostages who were recently killed were part of a planned release by name. And so the Israeli population, or a large segment of it, is drawing the conclusion that Netanyahu and his absolute warmongering, what appears to be a goal of eliminating the Palestinian people from the face of the earth, right? That goal runs counter to the safety of the hostages, and really, in some ways, the safety of the Israeli workers as well. So I think it's a positive thing. I haven't studied it deeply, but I thought it was a positive thing, because however people arrive at the need for a ceasefire, that's our main call. Mm-hmm. And when you make that call, people come at it from many different angles, but that's the call that we need. And I believe in the Israeli trade union action, strike and actions. They were also calling for humanitarian aid as part of that. So however people get there, once we're there, we can certainly unite, even if we're coming at it from different vantage points and different priorities.
The importance of coming together, even if we are arriving at it from different perspectives, I think being able to kind of in unity call for a ceasefire is important, and it kind of reminds me of some of the first iterations of interracial unionism in this country, reading some of the testimonies from, I'm thinking specifically of packing house workers, I think in Ohio and Cleveland, and you can read some of the testimonies of the black workers, how they didn't trust the white workers, when they initially tried to, amalgamate the black and white unions, but they recognized that we have to be in coalition with the white workers. Otherwise, we're going to be made to scab on them, or they're going to be made to scab on us. And then much the same with the white workers. The white workers were talking about, I'm better than, obviously I'm better than a black worker. This would be a white worker talking, working in a packing house. But if I allow them to be used to scab on me, then that's not good for me. And so there was a, kind of coming together from very different perspectives. But then within a decade or so, those black and white workers were marching together for integration. And so, I think that was a really powerful story of how just being together can actually foster some sort of fellow feeling and cooperation and a sense of solidarity, and start to erode at these long held prejudices. And obviously the dynamics are different and all of that, but you would hope that you could start to see some of that kind of stuff in Israel. Adam, I saw you taking a note. I don't know, was there anything else that you wanted to ask Brother Dimondstein before we let him go?
Oh, I just wanted to thank you for your leadership.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to share with everybody. If you want to go to the National Labor Network website, just Google National Labor Network for Ceasefire. There's a statement that individuals can sign, that local unions and central labor bodies can, and there's a fair amount of information on there. We obviously can't let down our guard. We have to keep the pressure on. That's what humanity demands, and that's what international working class solidarity demands. So we encourage all of you to check out the National Labor Network, join in. We had, for instance, a really interesting, inspiring, in some ways chilling, because we were getting reports from Gaza about what's happening to the people there. We had a webinar that I think about 1,000 people got on. It's on the National Labor Network, and it was a webinar with Palestinian trade unionists. And so that's a voice that we need to amplify, and union people need to, and working people need to hear from. So that's some of the work that we've been doing as well. And we encourage you to go on our website.
Yes, and I did. I've listened to a few or at least one of the webinars that you had with some Palestinian trade unionists, and it was great to hear from them, and obviously, harrowing and those sorts of things. And appreciate all the work that you're doing, both for American postal workers and in the name of international solidarity.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was going to say. That I really appreciate the leadership you've demonstrated, being willing to speak out in the name of solidarity, because I can imagine that there are other folks in similar high-ranking positions who find it easier not to. And I do appreciate that, and really I think it does make a difference. It empowers other unionists to be able to speak up and bring these conversations to our meetings and to our workplaces. It really does make a difference, and so I appreciate the leadership that you and the APWU have shown for this movement.
Well, we appreciate it, and look, I think it's the least we can do. I wish we could do more. But I believe that people that get elected to positions like mine have a responsibility to lead, to educate, to lead, to mobilize, and to do the right thing. I probably butchered a quote, but I think it was Martin Luther King that talked about at one point, I think it was in relation to the Vietnam War, that the character of a person is not so much what they do in times of convenience, but what they do in times of inconvenience. And so we do have a special responsibility as the U.S. labor movement and U.S. workers, since it's our government that's funding this slaughter, to speak up, to continue to press, and to make a fundamental, needed, even if it's a basic change, of saving lives and stopping this war.
Mark Dimondstein, president of the American Postal Workers Union, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to come on, and solidarity to all your good listeners out there.
All right.
Thanks, solidarity, brother.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.